What if one of the greatest empires in ancient history was built by a man who may not even have been born into royalty? And what if his rise to power was connected to the collapse of one of the most famous empires the world had ever seen, the empire of Alexander the Great? In the late 4th century BCE, the ancient world was changing rapidly. Powerful kingdoms were collapsing, generals were fighting for territory, and new leaders were searching for opportunities. Out of this chaos emerged a new force that would transform the history of South Asia, the Maurya Empire. But the rise of this empire began with a story that few people expected. The man at the center of it all was Chandragupta Maurya. Historians still debate the details of his early life. Some traditions claim he was born into a modest family, while others suggest he belonged to a minor warrior clan. What is certain is that Chandragupta did not begin life with the wealth or power usually associated with empire builders. Yet within a single generation, he would unite vast regions of India under one rule. So how did this extraordinary transformation happen? To understand that, we must first look at the world he lived in. In 323 BCE, Alexander the Great died suddenly in Babylon. His empire stretched across 3 continents, but it had one major weakness: there was no clear successor. Almost immediately, his generals began fighting each other for control. These conflicts became known as the Wars of the Devastation, and they plunged much of the ancient world into instability. As these struggles spread, the eastern edge of Alexander's empire became vulnerable. Governors struggled to maintain control, and local leaders began to see opportunities. In northern India, dissatisfaction with the ruling Nanda dynasty was already growing. But dissatisfaction alone does not overthrow an empire. It needed leadership, planning, and strategy. And that is where an unlikely partnership changed history. Enter Chanakya. Chanakya was a brilliant scholar who had studied politics, economics, and philosophy at the renowned university city of Takshashila. He believed strong leadership and disciplined administration were essential for a successful state. However, he had become deeply frustrated with the rulers of the Nanda dynasty, who controlled much of northern India. According to traditional accounts, Chanakya eventually encountered the young Chandragupta and immediately recognized his potential. Instead of seeing an ordinary youth, he saw a future ruler. Chanakya began training him in military tactics, diplomacy, and political strategy. Together, they began planning something bold: the overthrow of the Nanda Empire. At the time, the Nanda Empire was incredibly powerful. Its capital city, Pataliputra, was one of the largest and richest cities in ancient India. Its rulers commanded vast resources and a formidable army. But history often shows that even the strongest empires can collapse when internal dissatisfaction grows. Chandragupta and Chanakya spent years building alliances and recruiting supporters who were willing to challenge the dynasty. Their first attempts were not immediately successful, yet persistence slowly strengthened their position. Eventually, their forces marched toward Pataliputra itself. Around 321 BCE, after a series of confrontations and political maneuvers, the Nanda ruler was overthrown. Chandragupta Maurya became the new king. With that moment, the Maurya Empire was born. But victory created a new question. Could this new empire survive the powerful enemies surrounding it? The answer would soon be tested. Beyond India's borders, the territories once conquered by Alexander were now controlled by one of his former generals, Seleucus I Nicator. Seleucus hoped to reclaim lands that had once belonged to Alexander's empire, including regions near the Indian frontier. Around 305 BCE, Seleucus launched a campaign to regain these territories. What followed was a confrontation between 2 rising powers. Ancient sources describe the Mauryan army as enormous, including thousands of infantry soldiers, cavalry units, and hundreds of war elephants. In ancient warfare, elephants were terrifying weapons capable of smashing enemy formations. Facing this powerful army, Seleucus eventually chose diplomacy over continued war. In 303 BCE, the two rulers agreed to a treaty that reshaped the political landscape of the region. Under this agreement, Seleucus ceded several territories east of Afghanistan to Chandragupta's empire. In return, Chandragupta provided hundreds of war elephants that later helped the Seleucid army win major battles in the west. Yet the treaty achieved something even more important. It opened diplomatic relations between the Maurya Empire and the Greek world. Greek envoys soon visited Chandragupta's court. One of them, the ambassador Megasthenes, later wrote detailed accounts of Indian society. He described Pataliputra as a massive and well-organized city surrounded by defensive walls and watchtowers. These accounts suggest the Maurya Empire was not just a military power, it was also a highly organized state. But ruling such a vast empire required more than military strength. It required an efficient system of administration. How could one ruler govern such a large territory? The answer lay in a sophisticated political system developed by Chandragupta and his advisors. The empire was divided into provinces overseen by governors responsible for taxation, law enforcement, and public works. Trade routes connected major cities, allowing merchants to transport goods such as spices, textiles, and metals across long distances. Stability encouraged both commerce and agriculture to flourish. Much of what historians know about Mauryan governance comes from a remarkable political treatise called the Arthashastra. Traditionally attributed to Chanakya, the text explains how rulers could manage taxation, regulate trade, and maintain internal security. It also describes intelligence networks designed to detect corruption and potential rebellion. After ruling for roughly 2 decades, Chandragupta stepped down from power around 297 BCE. Later traditions suggest he adopted a religious life connected with Jainism and spent his final years pursuing spiritual discipline. Regardless of the details, his legacy was clear. He had created the first empire in Indian history to unite large parts of the subcontinent. Yet the Maurya Empire's most famous chapter was still ahead. Chandragupta's son, Bindusara, inherited the throne and continued expanding the empire. Greek sources referred to him as Amitracates, meaning destroyer of enemies. During his reign, Mauryan influence spread further south into the Indian subcontinent. Diplomatic relations with the Hellenistic world also continued. But the ruler who would define the Maurya Empire's legacy was Bindusara's son, Ashoka. Ashoka became emperor around 268 BCE after a struggle for power within the royal family. Early in his reign, he followed the traditional path of ancient rulers by expanding his territory through military campaigns. One of the most significant of these campaigns was against the coastal kingdom of Kalinga. At the time, Kalinga was an independent and prosperous region located along the eastern coast of India, making it both strategically and economically important. The conflict, remembered as the Kalinga War, was devastating. Ancient inscriptions suggest that more than 100,000 people were killed and many more were displaced. Entire communities were destroyed as the Mauryan army fought to bring the region under imperial control. Yet what happened next would change the empire forever. According to Ashoka's own inscriptions, the suffering caused by the war deeply affected him. He later declared that true victory should come not through violence, but through moral leadership. Ashoka embraced the teachings of Buddhism and began promoting values such as compassion, tolerance, and respect for all living beings. This transformation marked a dramatic shift in the way the Mauryan Empire would be governed in the years that followed. To spread these ideas across the empire, Ashoka ordered proclamations carved into rocks and pillars throughout his territory. These inscriptions, known as the Edicts of Ashoka, reveal a ruler committed to the welfare of his people. Ashoka also invested heavily in infrastructure and public welfare. Roads were improved, wells were dug on travel routes to provide shade for travelers. These reforms strengthened the empire while improving daily life for millions of people. More than 2,000 years later, The lion capital of Ashoka still serves as the national emblem of modern India. It stands as a reminder of an empire that reshaped history. If you enjoy learning about ancient civilizations, legendary rulers, and the empires that shaped our world, make sure to like the video and subscribe. More fascinating stories from history are coming next.